On March 16, Governor Cuomo signed an executive order calling for the closure of all schools across the New York state. Also around this time, non-essential businesses were ordered closed and residents across the state were asked to stay home. The coronavirus was accelerating. More tests were needed, more personal protective equipment was needed. Food supplies were depleting. Prices for essential products began to skyrocket. Hysteria was setting in. Many people with the financial means fled New York City. But for those who stayed, for those who had to stay, an entirely new reality surrounding education, work life, healthcare, and the economy was about to set in.
Remote learning, huge topic, but we don't have enough information about what forms of it are the most effective.
So the remote learning, I didn't think it was a good idea. I don't think kids at such a young age, like first grade, second grade, or even third grade, should have the option of remote learning. I feel like if kids are home, they more bound to feel like they don't have to get up to do the work. So with me, it was hard to get my goddaughter up early enough. So what I did was me and her teacher talked, and we decided that she would get up at 11 or 12 and do her work. But it would take her longer. And me not being a teacher, I felt like it was more difficult for her. And I didn't understand what was her struggles until the remote learning. I feel like the remote learning is bad for younger kids, but it was good for parents and guardians to see where their child actually is in school and how much need they have, or if they are excelling in school and they shouldn't be witty out right now. Because I noticed that my goddaughter has trouble writing, like she writes really slow, and she's in first grade. So that made me get books and let her write every day how she feeling, what she want to do, what she want to achieve. So that's helping better her writing.
In terms of Maya's remote learning, it came a week after school closed. I was clear at the beginning on the setup, the system, Google Classroom. She's in middle school, so she's got, 6 teachers? 5 or 6 different subjects, different teachers to manage. And so I sort of made the assumption that the teachers would be in great contact with the students, and I pulled out, frankly. I saw what was going on. I saw that she had her passwords, her setup, her laptop. I gave her a notebook to make sure she's sort of keeping track of her to-dos, and I pulled away. I think what really frustrated me toward the end of the school year was learning that Maya had been sort of not working at her highest capacity, is how the teachers described it to me as Maya's a top student who wasn't doing top work, but don't worry about it because we're in a global pandemic. I didn't get any word of that at any point throughout the semester, and the explanation behind that was we were dealing with, children who weren't top students before the pandemic who were struggling even more.
Because this was something that was thrust upon families and educators, overnight, there was no time for adequate training, looking at the data to identify which forms of most remote learning are most effective, to find out which children are matched best with which types of remote learning. So there was literally no evidence that one had to operate on to institute across school systems across the country this remote learning.
I don't like school to begin with. The only reason why I really even caught up with my credits and started attending school is because I transferred to an alternative school. And in that school, it was a smaller school and there was a lot of social interaction. I developed relationships there, so it was easier for me to stay in that environment. But in my old school, it was like 4,000 kids and the teachers weren't really my type of people and the students either, so I couldn't really focus. So remote learning in itself just was very difficult because I struggled with doing schoolwork from the comfort of my own home, because it was hard. It was really difficult because like I feel like part of what makes learning like interesting to me is social interaction and, you know, actually conversing and debating and like understanding certain things, but through conversation and like interaction. Like I can't really do it. Like if you give me something that I'm not interested in and you tell me to do it, I might try and focus on it, but I have a very short attention span to things that I don't have much interest in.
I'm very concerned because, you know, 13-year-old boys don't do social distancing. You know, I'm sure when he gets around his friends, they're going to fall into their regular cadence of how they engage. And so just being very clear about that, like there's just no way we can keep children, you know, 6 feet apart all day in school with masks on. And just trying to assess the risk of infection, and not only for him but what he could bring home or to other kind of older or health challenged family members. So that's a big concern. There's also concern that he's losing so much of learning, you know, opportunities and learning time, and also just the socialization and, you know, depression that could set in. You know, he's big into sports. I mean, he loves sports. So to not be able to do that also has a toll and an impact.
For me, the most challenging part about remote learning was not being able to get full connection with our teachers. And like in real school, like when you go to school, you get the teachers can answer your questions and come up to you. But in remote learning, they address your answers to everybody and you don't get the real connection with your teacher.
One of the hardest things I think I've dealt with in school. And I'm someone who enjoys school. I love school. I love learning for the reasons of being in the classroom. Being in a classroom, interacting with my peers, having debates, asking questions, you know, just learning conducively. And remote learning was horrible. It just, the teachers didn't know what they were doing because it was new for them as well. So they struggled. We struggled because it was new for us. You know, it was very, very tough. You couldn't send in assignments because this wasn't working, or you couldn't do that. So I lost a lot of, I lost about 2-3 weeks of learning, about like 8-10 hours of information that I would have gotten in the classroom. So I think I lost a chunk of knowledge, and a lot of time was taken from me, paid time. It wasn't a great experience, but toughed it out. It was kind of hard, especially for my 8:30 class or 8 a.m. class, because I was getting out of work 4 a.m. I now had new work hours and the same hours for class online. So that was a little tough, getting home 5-6 o'clock in the morning and having to be at class at 8. I didn't make it very often. I often forgot I even had class because I was just home, and I was like, oh shoot, what time is it? I have class right now, but it's over in like 10 minutes. So I don't even show up. It's like, oh my gosh, but I pulled through. Left with a 3.6 a semester, so it wasn't too bad, but it was very stressful.
I was looking at an article today. It's talking about a little girl who's 15 years old who's being sent to a juvenile detention center because she didn't do her online homework, right? A Black girl. So this idea that, and then when they look at the data of who's participating, they're finding that in predominantly Black and Latino schools, only 60 to 70% of the kids are actually logging in on a regular basis and actually keeping up with the assignments. So there's almost half of the kids who are not engaging in it at all.
I don't know if anyone heard about Elon Musk and the rest of them trying to propose that to make remote schooling a new thing. And I'm like, I understand homeschooling, but having children learn through cyber isn't good. It's gonna deter our social. I'm antisocial anyway, but it's gonna deter our social skills. A child should learn how to interact. That's the thing about social cues and whatnot. You don't want to go into a world everyone's robotic. So if you have, just people, screen to screen like this, it's gonna take away the naturalness of, the human. Humans are very social beings.
I mean, the challenges of shifting from a classroom-based instructional model to a remote instructional model on the fly are enormous. I mean, it would take a school district a year or more to actually properly prepare to deliver remote instruction. And in this instance, school districts and teachers did it on the fly, which I applaud them. And this is one time I was grateful and I'm no longer a principal.
We have about 20 buildings in Brooklyn. I don't know, 26. We have 12 to 1,300 units in Brooklyn, and like let's say 250 units in Washington Heights. I think it's 5 buildings. Okay. Okay. So how did it affect us? How did it affect us on a business level? When what happened, we said, you know what? Let's refinance and go out as far as we can and build up some reserves, because we think we're going to be sliding backwards based on what's happening. And even this year, the Rent Guidelines Board said they thought the increases should be X and Y, and the mayor is pressuring them to give a rent freeze, which I don't know what it's going to do. I don't know what a rent freeze is going to do for somebody who's out of a job and who can't pay the rent at all. So I don't understand the politics behind it.
A lot of the retail businesses were closed and officially, and it was hard getting in touch with them because many, when you're talking to a lot of small micro businesses, sometimes they don't want you into their business, so they don't give you their personal phone numbers or emails. You know what I mean? Or it's only when you see them that you can relay. But because of the relationship they have with other businesses, we're able to use those other businesses as conduits to reach out to them and tell them this is available. Take advantage of it now.
Literally, I'm making less money now and feel like I'm working more. Like the DOE and any other company right now that I've worked with, they are paying less for virtual classes than my regular rate. So my income has been chopped in a drastic way. I don't know. I'm concerned about that because I really would like to be working my regular rate and my regular, schedule, but that's not going to happen. So I'm concerned about money. I'm concerned that eventually, I'm fine now, but eventually it's going to start dwindling. And I'm kind of concerned about having to collect unemployment. Not really down with that. I would prefer to be working and continue to add to the bank.
Those who weren't paying, we got really good with a call log. Like anybody who we thought wasn't paying, or it was already the end of the month, we'd call and say, hi, how you doing? I know COVID, what's going on? What's happening? And most of them said, oh no, I'm just a little behind, I'm gonna send you a check. And they did. Some of them said, I'm in trouble, I don't have any money, I'm out of work, whatever the case. And that was a very small, tiny percentage, okay? And we said to them, okay, so let's come up with a plan. Like, could you give us $50 this month? And I don't know, just give us something. There were policymakers that were calling for rent cancellation. They were without calling for property tax cancellation.
As a job seeker, as I was at the beginning, late February, early mid-March, I watched all the good job postings and interview opportunities dry up so quickly as soon as things were being shut down. I mean, it was shut down in different phases, particularly for food service businesses. Some of them were allowed to remain open and others were effectively shut down on the latter end. I believe it was around March 26th. So at that point, nothing was really available anymore. And then on the other hand, I had to make a choice about whether or not it was worth it to me to become a frontline person. I was able to qualify for unemployment benefits, and a lot of people have not been able to. But that allows me to have a choice in whether or not I want to be a quote unquote essential worker, continuing to work in the food service industry for those businesses that have been open during this time, but also putting myself somewhat in the line of fire. And then, you know, without really any job security or health security, it just really wasn't worth it to me.
Once the pandemic struck, we were still working just a teeny tad bit. Our hours were severely reduced. We went from working full-time 40 hours to about 2 days a week with about 5 hours. And then, of course, we couldn't sustain that any longer. So our job tried to accommodate us, and we could no longer work inside the store, but then we were working online for about 15 hours a week. And then that completely could also not be sustained. So that was also canceled as well. So we just on furlough.
As we began to get used to the storm and we began to see what the potential challenges were, the city and the state did come up with initiatives. A lot of the initiatives were, I'm not sure if they had the resources to support all of the dependents. So, you know what I mean? So even if there were loans or grants, you know, the demand for those loans or grants far exceeded what they could send or provide.
The epidemic affected me not so much because I was considered essential, so I kept my job. I'm a custodian, first line of defense. I work in a medical center. So I stayed at work. However, because of I had took my, you know, being that I work in a COVID facility and you know, this was just going on, they was testing all employees. So it was one day my temperature was above normal. Yeah, I got sent home for 2 weeks. My test results came back negative. I had to receive a doctor's note saying I was cleared to come back to work, and that's what it was. I was cleared to come back to work. But overall, financially, no, it hasn't affected me because I stayed working outside of those 2 weeks. But I just received an email from HR saying that they are going to reimburse me those 2 weeks as PTO. So financially, it didn't affect me. I stayed working.
Before COVID-19 hit, 40% of New Yorkers did not have enough money to make ends meet. Overnight, we saw a complete loss of income as so many people had to, you know, shelter in place and social distance and not go to work. And for many low-income New Yorkers, if you don't work, you don't get paid.
So after I lost my job, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a little stressful because I do live alone. I maintain bills and all of that. So then a company I used to work with a couple of years ago were hiring to clean the buses to work for the MTA. And I was like, oh, this is great. This is wonderful. So I did that from Monday to Friday from the hours of 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. while still in school online, classes starting early in the morning at 9 a.m., 8:30 in the morning. So that was very, very interesting. The work was very taxing on my body. That was very interesting, but the pay was a little bit better, I guess, because of the hazards. And it was very, you know, interesting just to have, you know, a full, almost like a hazmat suit, our PPE gear and, you know, big social distance while working on the job. It was very interesting, but that is also now over as well. Honestly, job searching is very interesting because there are a lot of jobs available in this time, but there are jobs that no one wants to do. There's corona tracing, where you're tracing back corona and, you know, people talking to them phone. And then there's jobs where you're working in retail with a bunch of people around you. So it's like, wait a minute, these people aren't practicing safe safety. So it seems that there are jobs available with, you know, minimum wage in the time we are in still. Not a lot of safety guidelines or the best. And I've currently just signed up for unemployment, something that I did not want to do and I hadn't done until just now. And I'm like, man, so I think that may have to carry me over until we are kind of sort of normal again, where it's a little bit more safer, because I am concerned about Corona spiking up all over again. And I don't want to be working again just to be laid off again, to have to sign up for unemployment again.
On the state and city level, there was a lot of information coming out, and a lot of times people were grappling with it as events were occurring. This is something that has never really happened before, so I can appreciate, you know, some of the challenges they had. If there was a good response or overall response from the top, maybe it would have helped better. But the state and city had to really manage a lot of this on their own.
The COVID-19 Writers Project was made possible thanks to the support of BK Reader, Brooklyn Community Foundation, National Geographic Society, and the Pulitzer Center.